All right, thank you very much. All right, I believe that's all the action on the vote-only items. Let's go back to DMV. Oh, well, the Highway Patrol was here. Oh, well, it's enjoy the exercise. Sorry, guys. Musical chairs. Okay, DMV. We have, I think, most items, well, we'll see. Let's go to issue number 1, the motor vehicle account. Oh, dear. Fund condition. Tell me things are better.
Mark Newberger, Department of Finance.
Page 32, page 32. Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today about the motor vehicle account fund condition. The agenda does an excellent job laying out the problem and the associated issues. Fees collected to operate programs in the NBA are about $300 million short of expenses in the current year. The difference has been addressed using the repayment of general fund loans. However, a solution is required for future years. After considering the needs for capital outlay improvements for both DMV and CHP, as well as future estimated expenses, Finance determined that a $10 fee increase to the vehicle registration fee indexed to the Consumer Price Index is necessary to address the fund solvency. This will provide funding for the highest priority capital outlay projects for the CHP and DMV. Also, this will fund anticipated growth in expenditures for all MVA departments, primarily the CHP, DMV, and to a lesser extent, ARB and others. We are happy to answer any questions.
Well, you know, this is an ongoing problem. So your suggestions are?
The administration proposes raising the vehicle registration fee by $10 and indexing it to CPI to address the expenditures and out-year needs of the fund.
All right, let's hear from Finance. Oh, well, yes. I thought you were LAO.
No, they're LAO.
Thank you very much.
Over that.
No, I didn't. I thought she was, and then you moved. Go ahead.
Jessica Peters with the...
No, you would have no concerns about that. I know.
As was indicated, the MVA has faced an ongoing operational shortfall for the past several years and will continue to face an operational shortfall absent corrective action. As was mentioned, the governor has a proposal for the $10 registration fee increase and indexing that fee. Our assessment of the proposal, we find that, I should also say that the governor also proposes certain expenditure increases consistent with the administration's priorities that would also be funded from that fee increase, as well as maintaining solvency of the account. We find that under the governor's proposal for the fee increase as well as the expenditure increase, that the MVA would be barely balanced over the next several years, and that by 1920 in our forecast there would be a small operational shortfall in the fund. And so it's possible, and under our forecast, the problems with the fund condition and the MVA could recur in the future. The governor's proposal is one way of addressing the solvency issues in the MVA, at least in the short run, but the legislature has options, and you may want to consider those options. One option would be to reduce expenditures from the MVA. Even a small change in expenditures by approving maybe a slower rate of increase of expenditures in the future could help to keep the MVA in balance in the longer term. Another thing to consider is increasing MVA revenues. In addition to the governor's proposal for the registration fee increase, there's other fees that support the MVA, such as a driver's license fee, and the legislature could consider that or other sources. And third, we note that there is a current transfer of MVA revenues to the general fund of roughly $80 million. And one option would be to retain these revenues in the MVA instead of transferring them to the general fund. That alone would not solve the magnitude of the shortfall, but it could be one component. And you could use any mix of these different options to maintain solvency of the account in the long run.
May I ask one question?
Sure, go ahead.
What's the justification of sending money to the general fund? Was it for any specific related purpose or just to augment the general fund?
So my understanding is that this came about during the fiscal crisis, and that as well as certain other special funds, most of the money in the MVA is protected by Article 19 of the Constitution and restricted to transportation purposes. But there are some miscellaneous revenues and fees and things that go into the account that are not covered under Article 19. And so those non-Article 19 monies are what is transferred out. And so this has been in place for the last several years, but that was the genesis of it.
So a registration fee increase is one possibility, certainly. The indexing concerns me, but I understand why that's important. But I am concerned about this transfer to the general fund. We're now out of the problems that we had. And we have, it seems to me, we ought to be restoring some of the funds to their original purpose, which is the MVA, given the problem that we have with the MVA.
The rest is a user fee that could be justified.
Yeah. So any comments on that from, and also your comment is, you talked about reducing expenditures. Are there specific expenditures that you're thinking of, that you suggest?
We don't have any specific recommendations. Some of the larger new expenditures from the MVA that the governor is proposing is related to capital outlay projects for CHP and DMV. One approach could be to approve fewer new projects, or to, in the future, approve fewer new projects. And so I think some of those are some of the items later on your agenda. But the administration also has just an ongoing plan as part of their 5-year infrastructure plan to continue to bring additional CHP and DMV facility projects to the legislature each year into the future. And so you could slow the rate of growth of expenditures or approve fewer new expenditures now or in the future.
Okay. I think this is certainly an item that we need to hold open. Senator Nielsen, did you have any comments on this? I think this is an item that we're definitely going to hold open. It's going to need some more fine-tuning, I think. Let me hear from Finance again. You think it's great because you get more money. I get that. But, you know, it's a long-term sustainability issue, which we're not going to eliminate the deficit with just that $10 registration fee increase.
No, but I mean,
problems.
just to respond to several of the comments, as far as sort of the reserve questions, based on our projections, the fee increase that we're proposing would leave the MVA with a prudent but not excessive reserve. And as far as the transfer to the general fund, we note that that transfer does compute to the current stability of the general fund. Ending the transfer won't solve the MVA's structural imbalance issue. It's a $70 million transfer, and there's a
Not alone. Not alone.
No, sorry, excuse me. Ending the general fund transfer that currently occurs for non-Article 19 revenues. That won't solve the MVA's structural imbalance issues. In the long run, if the general fund transfer is ended, additional cuts would need to be considered to other general fund programs.
Got that. All right. Any comments from the committee members? All right. We're going to hold that open. I think that needs a little bit of work. Quite a bit of work, actually. So let's move on to issue number 2, the self-service. These are some of the expansion projects that we are asked to consider by the governor. Self-service terminal expansion projects, sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair Wolk and Senator Nielsen and Senator Povley. I'm Jean Schumo, the Director of the California Department of Motor Vehicles. With me is Robbie Crockett, the Budget Officer. Thank you for this opportunity to speak before all of you. DMV has 5 proposals in front of you today that I would provide a brief overview. The 4 BCPs are for self-service terminals known as SSTs. Our new statute proposal for the new motor vehicle program, AB 1461 statutes of 2015, and continuation of the capital outlay projects for 3 field offices in Delano, Santa Maria, and Inglewood, and the initial capital outlay phase to replace the San Diego field office on Normal Street. And we have a spring finance center for Real ID implementation. So the first proposal that I'm really excited to discuss is our self-service terminal program and how they fit into our business model. The self-service terminals have quickly become a very popular renewal channel for our customers, and the next logical step is to expand the terminals to retail locations outside the DMV. Self-service terminals have been extremely successful, which is noted by the almost 1,000% increase in transaction volumes over the last 5 years from 2010-11 to 2015-16. So the self-service terminals provide an additional customer service option that allows self-service and provides an immediate product for our customers, a registration tag in hand. The self-service option accepts multiple forms of payment, credit card, debit card, checks, and cash, the same as self-service options in retail stores. So we are moving towards a self-service society that customers are coming to expect when conducting business and are reluctant to wait in line. Examples are everywhere: grocery stores, rental car agencies, airline kiosks, and parking meter payment kiosks. So our proposal is to provide DMV $8 million to fund the continuous operation and expansion of the self-service terminals. Currently, about 30% of the self-service terminal transactions were registration renewal transactions that were processed with a technician in the field office the previous year. As we all know, over the years, the California Vehicle Code has gotten more complicated, which has made vehicle registration transactions more complex and difficult. The self-service terminals pull out the easier transactions from our field office technicians and allow them to focus primarily with multifaceted transactions such as vehicle transfer, renewals tied with a transfer, or parking citations, or a change of address. With the self-service terminals redirecting the easier transactions away from our technicians, we identified that we would save approximately 8 PYs associated with the increased transaction volumes, and requesting these PYs remain in our field offices to work on other workloads. One of the biggest benefits of this self-service terminal proposal is providing a renewal channel that can accept cash and be available after hours and on weekends. So our plan is to work with the current vendor and engage in partnerships with approximately 30 to 50 local retail locations statewide to install the self-service terminals. Placing these self-service terminals at non-DMV locations, such as grocery stores, brings the DMV to the customer at times and locations that are convenient to the customer. We will look at external locations, such as retail businesses that are identified as high-traffic commercial locations and more convenient to customers. We'll look to serve customers in heavy populated areas and persons who are unbanked. We will also look at underserved populations where we do not have a field office, and a self-service terminal would serve the community, thereby eliminating the need to drive a long distance to a field office. We have transaction data on all our field offices that we are reviewing to make recommendations to the current vendor in conjunction with geographical locations as to where we would like to have the external self-service terminals located. If the self-service terminal is underperforming, we will work with the vendor to move the terminal to another location to better serve our customers. So our current self-service terminal network is primarily located in Southern California and a few in Northern California. Our plan is to expand the self-service terminals in Northern California and Central California, as well as expanding in Southern California, where we already have a very high usage. We'll focus our efforts for locations by field offices that have a large number of vehicle registration renewal transactions, along with our larger offices that have a high volume of cash payments. So we plan to look at areas where traffic congestion and limited parking space affect our DMV customers. This would include looking at the cities of Los Angeles, San Diego, San Jose, San Francisco, Fresno, Sacramento, Long Beach, Bakersfield, Fullerton, and Santa Ana areas. We estimate deploying self-service terminals will take approximately 3 months upon delivery from the vendor. So in the future, we also are looking to expand the existing functionality on the self-service terminals to include making a field office appointment, renewing your driver's license or ID card on the terminal, or we have our car insurance program that we handle. We would like to include transactions for the vehicle registration suspension program. There are two transactions that only can be done online and not at a field office. That's paying the $14 reinstatement fee when your vehicle, we cancel your registration because of lack of insurance. You can only do that online, and this would offer an opportunity for a customer to use a terminal and not actually have to work with a technician. And the affidavit of non-use if a person wants to put their car on P&O. So offering these transactions on a self-service terminal would alleviate customer frustration of going to the field office and not being able to complete the transaction. We'd also look at offering other transactions that would be completed in under 3 minutes. And we also plan to expand the foreign languages on the terminals. Currently are only done in English and Spanish, and we would offer the additional language that we offer in our handbook, such as Armenian, Chinese, Hindi, Korean, Punjabi, Tagalog, and Vietnamese, as well as adding foreign languages that meet the need of the local user demographics. So the current contract we have expires in December 2018. And at that point, we plan to have a new contract in place that allows DMV to add additional transaction and expand to additional languages. And part of our plan is to develop a statement of work that would add these additional transactions and languages. And this statement of work is currently, we've already begun work on it for our next contract that would begin in January 2019. And then we would plan to have the vendor community bid on this contract, and we anticipate having this proposal completed by later this year, and would like to have vendor bids in early 2017. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a very interesting program to me. I think
Well, I like the concept of not everyone having to line up in the DMV lines when they can
So do we.
So do we.
go through, yes, go through the process of conducting business in a variety of other settings. So you're holding it open.
We're
so-
holding it open.
Okay.
LAO, you have some concerns?
Jessica Peters with the Analyst Office. Just to expand a little bit on the description of the specific proposal that's before the committee, it is $8 million on an ongoing basis for the self-service terminals. And this would fund, as I believe was mentioned, there is a transaction fee that is paid to the vendor of $3.75 per transaction conducted at a terminal. And the $8 million would go to fund those payments to the vendor for that $3.75 fee. Specifically, $4.4 million of the funding would go to support those transaction fee payments that are already currently redirected from the department's base budget. So when the department began using self-service terminals a number of years ago, they did not come to the legislature to request funding for it. They redirected within their budget.
I see.
And so $4.4 million of the funding would basically free up money in DMV's base budget for them to use for other unspecified purposes. $3.6 million of the funding would go to support the envisioned higher level of transaction fees that DMV estimates it would get by expanding the number of terminals that it has statewide. We find that expanding self-service terminals has some merit, but that we have some specific concerns with the governor's specific proposal. First, the self-service terminal expansion plan lacks detail. As was mentioned, the DMV is planning to expand the languages that are offered as well as the types of services. Those new features are not part of this budget request, and those would come later. They're part of DMV renegotiating a contract or awarding a new contract to a new vendor, which could carry higher costs with it. And so there could be additional costs in the future that currently are unknown. And so DMV has plans to make a number of changes, but the timing and sequencing of those changes is somewhat unclear, and whether or not their approach is the most efficient and effective. DMV has not yet identified the criteria it would use to determine the location of these terminals, or to estimate savings that would be generated by customers using them. And in terms of having a long-term strategy for how the use of self-service terminals fit into DMV's business model if they were to be expanded more significantly. And so we find that the proposal is really lacking a comprehensive plan regarding those elements. Second, we find that the funding is not justified. And this is because the self-service terminals generate potentially significant savings. And so you shouldn't need to augment DMV's budget in order to support the terminals, because they're generating even greater savings on the other side that could offset the costs of the vendor fee payment. And specifically, we estimate that given the level of transactions that DMV currently has and is estimating they would have, that the savings could be in the low tens of millions of dollars, which is far in excess of the $8 million that they're requesting to pay the vendor transaction fee. In addition, we find that $4.4 million of the requested funding is already being supported by DMV's base budget, and by augmenting their budget to free that up would free up these resources to be used for some other purpose that's determined by DMV as opposed to determined by the legislature, and it's unclear what those funds would be spent on, or if those meet the legislature's priority. It's very difficult for you to determine that without having information on what more than half of the funding would actually go to support. And we would just note that the self-service terminals also provide a convenience to DMV's customer. And in light of the $10 registration fee increase that was talked about on your last item, in order to support an augmentation of DMV's budget, the governor's proposing this $10 fee increase to maintain solvency of the MVA, as well as to support these increased expenditures. And this essentially, in effect, would charge all vehicle owners, when they register their vehicle, for the convenience of expanding these self-service terminals, even when it's a convenience that's only enjoyed by some DMV customers. In light of these concerns, we recommend that you reject the governor's proposal to augment DMV's budget for these purposes and require a detailed expansion plan on how DMV will use self-service terminals, how it fits into their longer-term overall business model, and also requiring them to develop a plan to account for the savings that are generated by these terminals, so that the legislature can weigh in on how those savings should be directed.
All right. You've heard the LAO. Would you like finance?
James Hacker, Department of Finance. Just to comment on a couple of the LAO's comments, then just to make a couple of points clear. First, the administration is very interested in exploring the use of these SSTs in a longer-term rethink of the DMV's business model. But it's important to note that at this point, California has no experience in placing self-service terminals outside of existing field offices. So we don't know where the best place to place them are. We don't know what kind of traffic we can drive or the best way to drive that traffic. And so we think it's premature to commit to any kind of long-term plan that has a specified or very quantified goal for the use of the SSTs without that kind of information. This initial sort of exploratory expansion would provide the opportunity to collect some of that data that could lead into that more comprehensive, well-thought-out long-term plan and not send us down a path that we wind up not wanting to go down. Second, we would just respond to the savings comment. We do estimate that this specific proposal, will create roughly 8 PYs in savings, and it's important to note that we have scored those savings towards the implementation of the DMV's Real ID requirements, which we'll talk to a little bit later, but we are capturing those savings elsewhere. It's also important to note that the use of SSTs is not purely an efficiency goal. It's not just meant to drive down DMV's costs. It's meant to be an improvement in service for DMV customers. It's meant to drive access to DMV services to customers who may not be able to make it to a field office during the course of a day, or those who have to pay cash or something to that effect. And segueing off of that onto the idea of a convenience fee, it's not currently DMV policy to charge a convenience fee for a given, for use of a given transaction channel. And more importantly, we believe that charging such a convenience fee for the use of SSTs outside of the field office, which is at least partially designed to increase access for lower income unbanked populations, would be an inherently regressive policy, which is something that we do not support.
Are there questions from the committee? Yes, Senator Nielsen.
There's been any studies as to consumer acceptance of these kiosks? Has it been done anywhere? Does anybody know if consumers would be attracted to this concept?
We haven't looked at that, but we can research and work with the vendor to see if we have any studies available, and we'll provide that information to you. But when you go out into the society today, it's a lot of kiosk driven. You use your iPhone, you use a lot of different things, and we want to make the convenience for the customer. For example, I was visiting the LA field office, and it's East LA, very busy. Couldn't get a parking space, drove around 3 or 4 times, went down the street to Subway, grabbed a quick lunch, came back and drove around 3 or 4 times before you can find a parking space. And we do have a self-service terminal in that office, and it's a very busy office, so that would be an ideal location to place in that community, another option to be able to come to the DMV, because in those busy offices, it is very hard to get in and actually, conduct business.
Well, the question was raised a minute ago about where do you locate these, and that would seem to be in this state an awesome task of establishing. Another issue that would need to be considered is the security there's a lot of privileged information that would be transmitted through such a kiosk. And I think about the security problems of ATMs as it now exists. I'm not saying you're going to be cash money going through these kiosks, but the security issue, I think, is important.
So the vendor has to meet PCI compliant standards, and they do meet that standards in terms of security. So the system has to be compliant with credit card payment industry standards, and they do meet that. And so in terms of security, that is a requirement of, because it is conducting credit card transaction, it has to meet credit card industry standards. So in terms of security, we meet those, the vendor does meet those standards, they're required to meet that. And again, most of the retail outlets, you do, if you go there, you do see there's a Wells Fargo, there's some other additional businesses that have a kiosk type of operation in retail outlets. But in terms of security and the security of the data, it does meet industry credit card standards.
Well, it was just observed that this ends up freeing up money for discretionary use within the department, and I find that not very attractive either. Would it not mean that we should be able to have fewer personnel in other offices, since we're now freeing up staff that don't have to deal with this work that the kiosk now will serve?
So what we are looking at is, when we initially started this project, it was a pilot, to see whether it would be successful. And now we can demonstrate it is successful. So in terms of, we wanted to make sure that it would go forward and be successful. But in terms of PY savings, we would monitor that, what the number of transactions that would equate to number of PYs. But with, we'll be talking later, I'll be a little bit later about the implementation of Real ID. There could be a considerable workload that would face our field offices that we would need to redirect those PYs to our field offices.
Well, redirected or eliminated. I mean, why would you redirect if you don't need those?
If we have to implement Real ID, we would probably need additional resources. Once we get through that, we would definitely look in terms of seeing, what workload we have. But again, we do get charged with a lot of different tasks to implement different legislation, and there are times when we cannot absorb that workload.
Well, put me down as a skeptic.
I have a question about the 8 PYs. That's all that would be, it seems a little low to me. Where'd you come up with 8? That would
So as the director had mentioned earlier in regards to, we have reports that identify someone that's using the self-service terminal transaction, where did that renewal transpire the prior year? And we're seeing about 30% of the individuals that are using the SST actually were a field office transaction the prior year. So what we did is we took the 30% and applied that to the increased volume. As the director mentioned earlier, the SST transactions is pulling out the more basic, the trivial, the easier transactions in our field offices. That's roughly about a 4.5 minute transaction. And so in order to come up with the PYs, you take the time value associated with the transaction that's being pulled out, times it by the volume, you come up with the hours to turn around and get the PY savings. So that's kind of how the 8 PYs was generated.
All right, any questions, any further questions? Okay, this is, we're holding this open, and I think there are a number of questions that the LAO has raised that really do need some answers. So I would say the details and the expenditure plan, the monies that are freed up, the savings of the redirected money, take a look at. We're going to need more info.
No problem.
Okay, but I'm really excited about the program. I'm a fan of kiosks. Okay, let's see. So we'll move on to the new motor voter program on page 40, issue 3. All right.
So our second request is for the new motor voter program, AB 1461. So this proposal is a new statute, BCP, to request the one-time costs associated with implementing the new motor voter program established under AB 1461 that was signed by Governor Brown last year. This program changes the current DMV voter registration process from an opt-in, where customers choose to register to vote, to an opt-out process, where customers will be automatically registered to vote unless they state they do not want to be registered. The department is requesting $3.9 million in general fund dollars to cover the cost to implement the automatic voter registration process identified in AB 1461. The costs incurred by the DMV for implementation are related to re-engineering of current processes, new hardware, software, and equipment, as well as system programming. From our conversations with the Secretary of State, our understanding is that they will plan to certify VoteCal in July 2016, and our understanding is they will have everything in place by July 1st, 2017. Then DMV is moving forward to meet a go-live date of AB 1461 of July 1st, 2017. So also I wanted to provide you an update on the funding for the May revise of last year. So last year, DMV received a budget augmentation for a technical upgrade to the voter registration process. So customers utilize a touchscreen terminal to complete the voter registration process. So we began this rollout of this technical upgrade on April 4th, and we have deployed the application in 21 of our field offices. We have another rollout plan for Monday, April 18th for 60 more offices, and the remaining offices will go live on April 25th. So that has from the May revise, we just rolled that out starting in April.
Okay. All right. LAO, any comments on this? All right, this is to implement 1461. We are going to hold this one open as well. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, sure. All right, Senator Nielsen.
What verification has to be provided to ensure the person is qualified to register to vote? What do they have to provide?
So they provide us their information. They have to be a U.S. citizen, so
They have to provide a document of citizenship?
they don't.
No, sir. Citizenship verification is done through Secretary of State. What they do is they have a form that's picked up at the Department of Motor Vehicles that they certify under penalty of perjury that they're a U.S. citizen and they're eligible to vote. One of the things that we did want to point out in regards to this conversation is 1461 calls out individuals that would get an AB 60 type license, the inability to allow them to vote. That's something that we actually programmed in as part of this technical upgrade, that an individual that is getting an AB 60 license from our technology system, it won't allow them to go to the touchscreen terminals to register to vote.
Now, is there some kind of a mark then on the license itself that indicates that they are then registered?
No.
No.
There is not.
No.
So that's your security then?
All right, I haven't taken any public comment on the first three items. They are held open, but on the first three items now, any public comment you have? Thank you. Tell us yes.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Trudy Schaefer, Senior Director for Program of the League of